side of performance is, in my opinion, is very undertrained, and yet it has such a huge component to your potential skill set, and things like baseball, shooting, obviously. So, what made you want to write a book about that in particular?
So great question. It's just something that's not really talked about, and my background, I was a special forces operator in the Canadian Forces. I was also a qualified sniper, and when we did our sniper training, one of the things they got us to do is there's just this little drill to determine eye dominance. So basically, you pick a target. It could be 20, 30, 40 feet away. Make a little, triangle like that with your hands. Hold it up, and then you just close one eye and then close the other eye. And based on what you're seeing in that, so for me, I'll close my right eye and I can still see what I'm looking at. If I close my left eye, it disappears, which means I'm left eye dominant.
What if you can't even close one eye? What does that mean? I can't close the right eye. I can't do it. I can't close the right eye and keep my left eye open. I can't.
Well, if you can get, maybe just do a circle.
Yep.
Joe, do a circle with your hand, and then just close it with your hand.
I think it's operator error.
Yeah, that's right. What you're looking at? If wish you could see it, I'm really trying to close my right eye. I can't do it. That's crazy. But yeah, it's cool. And then keep.
So what happens is you're either left eye dominant, you're right eye dominant, or you have binocular vision, and then you still see the sight picture regardless of which eye you close, and that's ideal. But out of a course of about 20 guys, there's only one guy that had full binocular vision. The rest of us were left or right eye dominant. Myself, I was left eye dominant, and so it's not a huge deal when you're behind the sight of a sniper rifle because you're right in there. You can still have both eyes open. It's still pretty easy to pick up with your non-dominant eye. But if you have a pistol and you're holding it in front of your right eye, really the only way it's really hard to pick up the sight picture with your non-dominant eye. So you're either stuck doing two things. One, you're shifting your body over to get it in front of your left eye, or you're learning to shoot left-handed, which is even worse. And in fact, there's a third option, and you can actually train to have binocular vision so that you can pick up those sights with one eye or the other.
Very cool. So gang, we jumped right into this podcast with Wes Kennedy from Elite Training Programs, and we're talking about eyes and how important it is for your performance. And it's cool when you're talking about this, Wes, is there's hidden skills in people who have actual real experience with stuff like shooting a gun, for example. Like you've obviously been trained on it, and you're talking about shooting right-handed and left-handed. And as a guy who's novice, but I'm obviously interested in it. Guys, you can't tell I'm kind of camoed up. I'm getting ready to harvest a bear with a buddy, but it's interesting to me. So you hear folks training and you watch folks learning how to shoot a gun, and you're talking about it right now, closing one eye, keeping one eye open, keeping them open. Would this left eye, right eye dominance thing play into that? Would you kind of do that test and then decide, are you someone who should close one eye, keep it open, be left-handed or right-handed?
Well, so if you're hunting,
yep.
I don't really think it's a big deal if you close an eye. The issue and where that comes from that you want to keep both eyes open is that if you're in like a life or death situation and your nervous system is fired up and you're in that fight or flight parasympathetic response, I always get those two confused. Your eyes are going to open up, so you're not really going to have a choice. So if you go spend all your time training with one eye closed, well, when that life or death situation comes up, your body's just going to open both eyes. So you need to make sure that you're training for that.
Fired up.
But if you're just hunting and you're up in a tree stand, I mean, unless you expect to get in a life or death situation with a bear, which you might.
It could happen.
No.
I told Joe, I said it's gonna be like the Revenant, so he better, be ready for that. He better have a big knife.
But Joe's just gonna take his gloves off and fight him.
Yeah, well,
yeah, right. It's a black bear.
People don't. There was a
little black bear, bro.
Yeah, little black bear. But we have black bears around here at West Point. They're not little. They still scare the shit out of you. But no, we're not in a tree stand. We're stalking around. We're gonna be covering ground. My buddy Josh likes to cover ground. We're gonna be walking up and down some mountains up there, and it should be pretty fun. What I have to keep distance from this creature is a spear. I have like a 4-foot spear my buddy bought me. I'm going to use it. So I told Danny the plan is Josh is going to piss the bear off and get it to charge me, and then I'm going to just lay back and let the bear fall on me. What do you think that'll work, Wes? Can we do that? Because I want this to be an epic hunt, but no, I think we laugh about.
That's like the last ditch option. That's like the last.
That's exactly right.
In many movies.
Yes.
There are many movies where that's how it ends.
Well, you can tell I've visualized many things. I think that's part of it, right? So it kind of goes right into this conversation that we're having about eyesight. So when I worked this Nike Spark machine, there was all kinds of cool training things. They had goggles that would blink you in and out, and they would go strobe, and it would teach you how to catch things. And there was this whole kind of virtual unit where you had to like hit dots and play all these kind of cool games. Aside from just determining dominance, what kind of are there drills and skills in your book about how to train for better visual performance?
Yeah, there's some very, so it kind of lays out a few different things like, figuring out if you're left or right eye dominant, figuring out if you have a good ability to like pick up targets.
Okay.
So moving from one target to the other, which is really an important skill set, especially in like a close combat environment where you need to shift from like one corner of the room to the other and pick up that target really quickly. And it also assesses things like your ability to keep focus on a specific point, right? So if you just open up a book, pick out a letter I somewhere and stare at that dot and just try and stare at that for 45 seconds, if you're able to do that, it's going to carry over well to just having a target in your reticle in a rifle scope. But if you find your eyes jumping all over the place, obviously you're going to have trouble keeping that target aligned in the reticle. And then once you just determine that, there's a bunch of drills laid out in the book. And, remember, I didn't invent any of these.
Sure.
Like, a lot of this stuff was already, a lot of guys a lot smarter than me have created this. I've just taken it, kind of repackaged it, and delivered it so that shooters and combat athletes understand how to use it for them and how it applies to them.
Well, the eyesight thing's interesting to me because I guess I would ask you, how many guys on the teams you've been with in these more special operation based groups have contacts, glasses, or like poor eyesight, and actually make it to the point where they're that kind of specialized as a shooter?
Say, what was the last thing you said?
Yeah, how many of these guys actually get to the point where they do become really good shooters with some sort of vision deficiency that hasn't been corrected? I guess you put it that way.
Oh, lots of them. Yeah, lots of guys with great shooters. I think this kind of book is the icing on the cake. Like, nobody's going to take this book, do the drills, and then go out and shoot their first pistol and be a pro because they did some vision training skills. But if you're already good, if you're already a proficient shooter, and you just want to tighten things up a little bit more and give yourself the edge, then it's a great book. And I think more and more guys these days, though, are getting Lasik surgery. So I think there's less and less guys that actually have deficient vision. I had deficient vision. I just kind of scraped by to get into the special operations. Like, I think if I was any worse, I wouldn't have been accepted or into the combat arms at all. But I actually wore contact lenses for both my tours in Afghanistan, which is a terrible, terrible idea.
Yeah.
Sounds like it.
Lots of readjusting them in the middle of the desert. But then I got Lasik surgery later in my career, thank God.
Well,
I was going to say, like, when I had it done, it was a dramatic difference between glasses and LASIK, just because of, I guess, the clarity, that your things not getting in the way, whether the glass lens being a little dirty or whatever there might be. And I didn't notice it so much in shooting. I don't think I've ever been a very good shot, but in like baseball, like seeing a ball, it was night and day, man. The amount of like spin I could pick up. So I could just imagine how effective that would be for a shooter.
And that's your background, Danny? Baseball player?
Yeah, I played baseball. I mean, I was in the Army, but I wasn't a good shooter, and I was in medical, side of things when I was in the military. But I guess I would notice a difference. We did mainly, handgun qualifications, which was a lot, shorter distances, so it didn't make much of a difference versus like our M4. But I noticed a huge difference, and it seemed like a lot of guys were getting PRK instead of LASIK. I guess because of the flap that it leaves in your eye. I know they said that about me. It would exclude me from certain jobs, but it was 100% worth it. If you're thinking about doing it, do it. It's the best thing that ever happened to me. Besides my wife.
Well, very cool.
Throw that in.
Wes, you kind of bring up your book as this tip of the iceberg for folks interested in getting into a gun and shooting and getting proficient in that. And arms is interesting. Obviously, I've kind of discussed why I'm into it. I want to hunt. I found a buddy. He's kind of coaching me up there. For folks who are looking to build the base, right? Who don't have access to a buddy. There's lots of people with no friends, right? There are people who all their friends are on the internet now. If someone wanted to like just train themselves up on, man, I'm interested in arms, want to get into this. Give us some places where they should get trained up before they just go purchase their firearms.
Oh, for like pistol shooting or
Yeah.
shooting.
Yep. How do you? Yeah, you're talking about the tip of the iceberg. How do you build the base? Where would you start?
Well, you can either get in, you can either sign your life away to the military
There you go.
for 5 to 20 years and let them take care of you. Or, I'm not we don't do shooting.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to probably start holding some events and have a bit of shooting just as a fun piece at the end for guys. But, my company, we don't take guys to the range and take them from beginner to expert. I mean, we talked earlier, Joe, you had Pat McNamara
Yep.
On your show a few weeks back, and I know he has a firearms instruction company. I mean, a guy like that would be your best bet. That's a guy that I'm not a gun nut.
Sure.
I've been a sniper, special forces operator, but believe it or not, I like the shooting, but just give me the gun, give me the bullet to go in it. I don't really want to know much past that point. But a guy like him, he lives and breathes that stuff. He loves it, and
very cool.
Has years more experience behind a gun than I do as well. So that's really his bread and butter, I think.
Well, it seems like there's a lot more of that going on too. I don't know if it's just that some of these ex-tactical athletes are I don't know, just marketable. People want to learn more about them, whatever it might be. But I see a lot. Go Ruck is kind of doing some of that stuff. They're like people like Pat that have this massive amount of knowledge and skill set with that. It's cool because I do see a lot of people that get involved in firearms and they actually don't know what the hell they're doing. I would give a good example of my brother-in-law going to the range with his Glock for the first time, and I steered way away from him because I knew like this guy, keep it down range, dude, understand what you're doing, be safe, but he couldn't hit shit. And I told him, I was like, this is more dangerous than not having this gun in your house. Like, if somebody comes in, you're screwed. You're not going to hit anything. You probably shoot your dog. So I think that the actual training side is kind of underestimated, and it's not something you can read from a book.
Yeah, it's funny. I spent my time in the military, and here in Canada, right in the U.S., you just go to the store and buy a gun, right? Am I correct?
Yeah, you want a gun? You want me to send you a gun?
Yeah, we'll mail it to you. Depends where.
Here in Canada,
I live in Georgia, man. I get a gun tomorrow.
Nice. Here in Canada, you have to get a firearms license. So for a restricted and non-restricted. So restricted is like handguns, basically. You have to do a 2-day course. You have to do a handling test at the end. You have to answer.
Wow, I didn't know that.
A couple multiple choice questions. So I actually just did mine. I haven't owned a firearm since I left the military, and they didn't give me anything special that gave me any sort of waiver because I did all that training when I was in, so I still had to do the same as everybody else. I have a good buddy of mine who's a former coxswain with JTF2, our counter-terrorism unit here in Canada, and he owns he runs a firearms training company. His name's Pat Miller. And we were kind of talking about, he made a good analogy in that even that 2-day course, it really isn't enough. I mean, it's like, he made a good analogy. He's like, it's like having somebody come to a parking lot, parallel parking a car, and then be like, all right, here's your driver's license.
Yeah.
Really, all those drills that they get taught in those 2 days are nice, but they go right out the window. So,
oh, sure.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of training behind it for sure.
No, and it's interesting. You have this implement that could really do damage, and you want to protect yourself, and here it's it's a Second Amendment right, and there's reasons behind it, and we get it. But I think you can also have some sense where I'm interested in doing it. I think it's a route that the family wants to go, but it's not a route that we're going to go until we feel comfortable having it. Until I feel comfortable having it, and until I know how to actually handle my kids and teach them about it, it's just not going to be something that's going to enter the house. I mean, my son Mason is batshit crazy. I mean, I'll tell him, don't do this, and he'll look me dead in the face, and he goes, okay, Daddy, I won't, and then 3 seconds later, he's doing it, right? So in no way, shape, or form do I trust the fact that I'll keep him from it. If he finds it, something bad wouldn't happen. Until I know that he's on board, it's just not going to happen. So I think education is key with that. Kind of bring up this Second Amendment thing and differences in Canada and the U.S. And right now we'll kind of switch gears, but we're in this crazy political season here. So talking for someone who doesn't live in the U.S., what do you think of what's going on over here? We got two kind of candidates who don't seem to be very liked by anybody, but they're running the show. How do folks in Canada view this American presidential election? Is it on your guys' radar at all?
Oh, well, of course. It's entertaining.
Okay.
It's also kind of, it's kind of disappointing. You got half my family's American. My entire dad's side of the family is from the States. My dad served in the U.S. Air Force. My grandfather in the U.S. Navy in World War II. So, I have a lot of respect and admiration for our brothers down south. And it's unfortunate that the two candidates that are left running for the highest, office in the country are who they are, right? It's not super inspiring, and I get
Sure.
both sides of it, right? I get the people that are interested in having Trump in because he's going to shake things up, and he's going to shake up the status quo, and they feel like he's trustworthy because he says what's on his mind. And I get the other side of things too, and I don't know, man. I think that stuff is so. We've created such a complex system at this point that trying to make a decision anymore on who to vote for, or, how to change things it just gets tougher and tougher. So I'm not a political major. I don't
Nope.
spend a lot of time reading or watching politics. So I'm probably not the guy to ask, but it's interesting. It's interesting.
Well, I try to stay away from it because it causes so many fights within my own family. Not my family, my wife's family. We put it that way. They're a perfect example of what's wrong with the United States. Half of them are super, super right. The other half are extreme left, and there's no middle ground. And when they get together, especially during once every 4 years, when it's presidential election, it collides. Everyone collides, and usually in one house all at one time, and half of them leave and drive away angry. And I've now witnessed this 3 election seasons with my wife, and it's frankly silly because 90% of it they agree on. 10% of it they couldn't disagree more on, and they get heated about it. It's a heated topic. So it's sad. I think it's sad that it's turned into a bit of a mockery for a position that should be. We should have the best person in the whole country in there, and that is not what's going to happen.
Yeah, and I would say I'm on board. That's where Wes brings up he says it's not inspiring, right? And then Danny talks about how divisive it is, and that's the disappointing part. There's almost no option that you're for. It's almost, okay, what do I do to make this? What do I do to keep this from happening? And that's never a good choice for anybody. So yeah, it's interesting, and because I'll be honest with you, Wes, and don't judge me on this. I have no idea anything at all about the political system in Canada. I don't know what's going on up there.
Man.
Yeah, so is it different? How different is it than what we see over here? What do you guys do?
First of all, I don't have any judgment behind that.
Yep.
I was watching a video the other day where they went to a campus and they asked people, like, who's the vice president of the United States? And this is in the U.S. Or who won the Civil War? And like, I get that there are things that are very easily to know.
Yeah.
But I'm also like, well, not everybody spends their time on this. Like,
that's right.
It's not. I have zero reason to make sure at the top of my head I always know who the vice president of the U.S. is. And
that's right.
I think it's kind of silly for one. So I think people judge themselves for not knowing it, and then through that they try and sound like they actually have an opinion on the political situation of the day, and it's all just a bunch of confirmation bias, right? We watch a funny YouTube video and we're like, yeah, see, that's like exactly what I said. Trump is shit. Like, well, maybe, or vice versa. Hillary's a witch. She's terrible. She's gonna take us to the dark ages again. It's like, maybe, man. I don't know.
Sure.
But the political system in Canada, I think the nice thing about us is that we have a third party, right? And you guys have you have the Green Party and the
There's a couple you can.
There's like a libertarian independent kind of.
Yeah.
Libertarian, right?
Sure.
And obviously they don't have any seats, correct?
Very few. I mean, they're
There's
not.
not much, yeah.
They definitely don't. There's all kinds of little rules about getting them into the big presidential debates. I mean, they're on the ballot. Like I already filled out my absentee ballot for South Carolina. But so there's 5 choices for there, but really they're not in the running. And yeah, the third party, it's definitely a 2-party system. And I would say that's somewhat frustrating because, you hear it a lot where, you can be fiscally conservative but socially liberal, then where do you go? You know what I mean? And you look at the 15 Republican candidates and they're all pretty socially conservative. So, even a guy who believes in small government but wants to say, hey, do whatever you want, legalize this, marry that person, where do they go? You know what I mean? It's a really tough decision.
And so, it's nice. We have 3 main parties, and then we still have like the Bloc Québécois kind of done with, but they were a sizable party up until I think the last election. And then we even have the Green Party, which I think only has like 1 or maybe 2 or 3 seats. It might just be 1. But we at least have those 3 parties, which really makes a difference as opposed to just 2 parties going head to head and getting into these deadlocks over really important issues. So that's a big one. Well, and I think our prime minister has a lot more power than your president does, is what my understanding. Really? Yeah. Which can be good or bad.
Something to think about.
If there's a perfect system, we'd have it already, right?
That's right.
Absolutely. Well, I tell you, what I'd like to do is let's switch gears and get into your wheelhouse. It sounds like none of us are wheelhouse is politics.
None.
But your wheelhouse is combat strength training and conditioning, which I think is an interesting sub niche of overall kind of programming for strength and conditioning, because the tactical athlete is different than your traditional sport athlete. And in your opinion, when you're programming for a tactical athlete, what are some of your top kind of goals for that person or needs that you're going to try to get them better at in preparation for something like a selection process?
Yeah, great question. So I think, 2 places I'd start just in terms of getting their mindset right is 1, let's get really clear on their purpose. Like a lot of guys, I think I've had a lot of guys come to me that, they hear me on a podcast, they don't like whatever they're doing, and they view selection and special operations as this crucible event that's going to solve all their problems. They're going to be fulfilled. And for some guys, it is the case. Like they really want that. They have really deep rooted reasons why that's going to be fulfilling and purposeful for them. And for other guys, it's really not. So first place I like to look is like, let's get really clear and make sure this is what you want. And number 2, understanding like actually how long it's going to take based on where they're at. Right? And there's going to be a difference between training them for the initial PT test. So there's an initial physical training test for the listeners that aren't familiar with this process. There's initial, takes a couple hours on one day or a couple hours on one day, a couple hours on the next day. It can be like running, push-ups, pull-ups, sit-ups, rucking, swimming. And they have to pass that, hit a certain standard for that to be able to go to selection. So first thing we gotta do is like, how do we get you fit enough to accomplish this PT test? Which isn't necessarily representative of phase 2 and 3. Phase 2 is selection. It's a 1 to 3 week phase, super high work volume, little sleep, lots of running, rucking, swimming, tough grinder type activity under constant scrutiny and stress. And really guys want to be as strong as possible and be able to handle as much volume as possible. So second stage is how do we get you prepared for that? And then if we can get you through that, how do we keep you in the fight for the next 10 to 20 years so that you have longevity, which means, now you're going to have a slightly lower level intensity in your work. There's few times where you're going to be doing that same high amount of volume as you did in selection, even when you're overseas. Generally, guys are going to want to get bigger. They're going to start wanting to work on their biceps, triceps, look good, have the beach body. We generally need to figure out, hey, what's your other interest? Because most guys don't want to just keep rucking, swimming, and running and really training to be the best combat athlete. They want to be good, but they probably want to do some CrossFit competition, or they want to go do a powerlifting competition, right? So it's figuring out what's actually going to keep you in the game 10 to 20 years. without getting injured and having some fun with it.
I want to hit on training that athlete, that tactical athlete, to go from stage 1 to stage 2. In your opinion, working with a bunch of these folks, when you go on your website, and I would suggest anybody go head over to elitetrainingprograms.com. It's a great site, a lot of cool content. They even got a cool YouTube page with video demos and stuff like that. But those athletes going from stage 1 to stage 2, in your opinion, having worked with a few of them, are a lot of their issues in making that jump? Would you say it's more mental, or is there a more physical challenge? And which would be harder to help them deal with?
Well, I think it's a little bit of both. One is just understanding, and it depends too, right? Sometimes these guys have to do their PT test a month or 2 months before. I'm working with one guy that, because he has to get an age waiver, he actually has to do like 3 PT tests over the next 8 months before he gets to go on, I think, MARSOC selection, which is Marine Special Operations. So it's going to depend, first of all. Second thing, it's more really getting them to understand, like, the PT test isn't a good determiner of whether it's not an ideal determiner of whether you're going to be successful on selection. In the U.S. anyways, I noticed that, one, the run times, like this 18-minute 3-mile run in sub 18 minutes, or being able to do 90 push-ups in 2 minutes, I think it could be a little bit lower. I think something that would be more important is being able to run 5 kilometers at a high intensity, rest 30 minutes times 3, or do 2,000 push-ups throughout the week, right? That's going to be more representative. So there's small nuances where guys get really locked into, man, I got to get 300 on this PT test. I got to score as high as possible, and they forget that the real goal is just getting the selection.
Sure.
So sometimes they need to do that based on the recruiter and the situation. We'll have that talk. But sometimes we need to kind of forget about this, let's get the best score, and actually just get the best score on selection instead.
So what do you do if the test is very close or right before assessment starts? Is that something where you're rolling right into programming for phase 2, and under the assumption that when time comes, you'll meet the standards for the PT test and you'll be ready for what really matters? Or how do you modify that or adjust for that?
It all depends. It depends on how much it matters for the unit, right? To get a perfect score, if they're like this one guy I'm working with, he has to get an age waiver. He really has to score 300, right? All the cards are kind of stacked against him. He needs to show that he can have a perfect score at his age. So in his case, well, he's out of the game if he doesn't get that. So our whole focus is actually just on that, and then we worry about selection next. If that's not the case, if somebody's already really close to that 300, then we're just going to start training for phase 2, early on. And ideally, I'd prefer to work with somebody for 12 months or more. I have had guys that come to me 3 or 4 months before, and in that case, we just have to throw the kitchen sink at them, right? You got 3 or 4 months. We need you to adapt as quickly as possible. Screw the consequences to your, hormonal system and endocrine system on the back end, because you're going to have to dig yourself out of that hole then, because we only have 3 or 4 months.
Interesting. It doesn't sound so different from what, a lot of the folks who listen to our show are CrossFit athletes, right? And, you can't worry about making regionals until you can get through the open, right? And then once you can get to regionals, then you can worry about the games. But you got to achieve these steps. And depending on who you are, you have to make adjustments in your training. And, if you got to pass a test, you got to pass a test. So it kind of brings into testing and working with athletes. So that said, we're talking about a special tactical athlete in your population. Is that all that you work with over at Elite Training Programs, or are there some regular athletes or competitive athletes, like CrossFit style folks that you work with?
Yeah, so when we started, we kind of tried to have a little bit, I think most businesses have a bit of a broader niche, and we're really trying to focus on that combat athlete and leaders, really. Right, we want to make leaders. We want people that want to do a special operations selection. We want to work with guys that want to be firefighters. We want to work with police officers. We want to work with leaders that understand that the training they do with us will give them the self-confidence at work. It'll give them a belief in self to tackle insurmountable odds. And it'll just allow them, it'll set them up to live a purposeful, fulfilling life. And so even if they're not training for a specific selection or police or firefighter, we still want those type of individuals. We want to build leaders at the end of the day.
Well, I'd like to ask you about mental toughness too. You kind of brought this up a little bit earlier, and with mental toughness, how much of that do you think is kind of ingrained in somebody through their upbringing, or maybe just in some ways just part of them, and how much of it can actually be trained into somebody?
Great question. So, one, you're going to have personalities, right? Like, I don't know if you're familiar with the DISC assessment.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like guys like us three were probably D's and I's, or we're at least part of it is we're near that.
Don't forget. I was gonna say, don't not cut you off. Don't forget the CK at the end, right? DICK.
Yeah.
That's what my wife would say. Just kidding, Liza. Yeah, that's right. Sorry, didn't mean to cut you off there, Wes. Go for it.
Totally fine. So I think there's some guys. Yeah, they're just not really suited, but I don't think a lot of those guys are applying in the first place. And then I know, because I see the comments, there's this belief, and it makes zero sense to me. Guys will comment sometimes on our Facebook ads, you either got it or you don't. That's so you're not even thinking straight when you say that. If you either got it or you don't, and you can't train mental toughness, then why aren't we all just sitting on the floor shitting in our diapers like we were when we were one? Our brain changes.
Sure.
You get that. You just think about it for 2 seconds, you'll understand that our brain changes. So of course we can train mental toughness. I think the challenge is actually defining what is mental toughness. And I think the traditional approach to it, there's a great book out there by Dr. Terry Orlick called In Pursuit of Excellence. And he goes through a lot of the traditional mental toughness, right? Visualization, distraction control, things of that nature. Huge value to that. What actually holds people back are the survival mechanisms they've created, the stories that they created growing up, right? Things happen to us growing up. We make it mean something. We create a story about it, and then we spend the rest of our lives protecting that story and making sure nobody else finds that out about us, and making sure that it's not true. Right? You're a talkative kid in class, you get told to stop talking, now you're too much, and now you try and make sure nobody else thinks you're too much through whatever mechanism that is, right? And it's these kind of things that really hold guys back, that have them self-sabotage their own results, right? It's easy, man. I can write up a training program, I can give you the nutrition you need, but when we get to the roadblock where you're not following it, then we have to take that deep dive and really look hey, what's causing you to believe that you're any different than the guy next to you, and that you can't overcome the circumstances in front of you.
Very cool.
So that stuff usually takes a deeper, people need to be willing to get messy, uncomfortable, pissed off, have emotions, and get rid of this idea that you're going to be this, machine, Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, where you don't feel anything, you're just a killing machine, because it's just not the case. And if you try and go that route, you're going to have a really unhappy, miserable existence, even if you are successful in the special operations.
It's funny you bring up Arnold Schwarzenegger on this, but in my mind, you almost have to channel your inner Tyrion Lannister, right? I mean, what did he say in season 1 of Game of Thrones? I mean, you got to wear he's telling Jon Snow, you got to let him know you're a bastard. You got to wear it on your heart. You got to let people know, and then they can't tear you down with it, right? So how do you guys go about that? I mean, are we sitting around a campfire talking these things out, or is this kind of one-on-one counseling that you guys do with these athletes? How do you draw this out with folks, and what's the mechanism to do that?
Right, good question. So I think a good distinction to make is the difference between counseling, consulting, and coaching. So what we call strength and conditioning coaching is really consulting for the most part. I have a goal. I'm at A. I want to get to B, and then I write in the steps, do step 1, step 2, barbell press, run, and then if you do all these steps, you're going to get there. Right? It's really consulting, even though we call it coaching.
Okay.
Counseling is the work of psychiatrists, licensed medical healthcare professionals, psychologists, deals with trauma, it deals with a lot of stuff in the past, deals with mental issues, mental disease. Coaching, like ontological coaching, actual professional coaching, is really future-based. It's creating the future that you want to create. So I'm a professional coach by trade as well. And if guys decide to have those kind of conversations with me, then it's really just a conversation. It's a partnership. It's reflecting back to them that, hey, man, you're saying you want this and your actions are saying this. What's up with that? And a lot of it is really the client that's going to do the work, right? I'm not going to come in and say, hey, it's for these reasons, because they need to come to that realization themselves and create the practices to change over time. Some of the stuff I'm trying to implement, though, into the group training that we're going to be starting in November is basically just some like modules and some specific reading, so they start getting into some more of these concepts, because it's really like a lifelong practice. Right? If you want to take on the mental toughness piece the way you want to take on fitness, you need to put the time aside the way you spend 90 minutes in the gym 5 days a week and eat the right foods. You need to go and train your brain, learn some new concepts, and have some paradigm shifts, and that stuff takes time and it doesn't happen right away.
The mental toughness side of things that you were describing, I'm interested to see what kind of drills that simple things you think could do, because when I was in the Army, I had a conversation with one of my battalion commanders that was he was a lieutenant colonel, and I really thought this guy had a very interesting leadership style, very kind of lead from the front style. And I was running with him one morning, and I said, sir, all this long distance running, I don't think it's really making us all that fit for what for what your job, as an infantry officer and your soldiers are probably going to be doing the most of, right? And maybe we'd be better off doing something else. And he said to me, running in early in the morning when you don't want to do it is for mental toughness. It's not for conditioning. And I thought about that, and I was like, that makes a lot of sense, I guess, in a way. And I think of it that way, especially in formation in groups and ability groups, when maybe they're running a little faster than you think you could, but you don't want to stop, obviously. What are your thoughts on that? Like, what are some simple ways that people can train mental toughness? Is it just like, do you get up early and be uncomfortable and get used to that? Or, is it more complex than that?
Great question. So before I answer that, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to turn off this Facebook Live so guys have a reason to come check out your podcast.
Oh, there you go.
Where can guys find the podcast?
We're in all the spots, iTunes. We are on Stitcher Radio. We can check out, most importantly, where you should visit is the www.docandjock.com. It'll be there.
Nice. So www.docandjock.com.
Yep.
iTunes, Stitcher. You guys can check out the podcast in a few days, few weeks.
You're looking about a month. No, because we got up. Yeah, we are 3 weeks, because we got 2. Yep, 3 Mondays from now.
Wait with bated breath on your chairs, guys. 3 weeks ago.
You're going to want to know the answer to this for your mental
health. You're going to want to know the answer, so mark it in your calendars. All right, guys, I'm signing out, and you can hear the rest of this in a little while.
Yeah, and we can edit that out. We and we'll go over this at the end. We do our best to bank a little bit of content. But yeah, it'll probably be 3 Mondays from now.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so that's a great question with the mental toughness. I think people get really wrapped up in like strategies, right? It just becomes formulaic again, and no doubt there's benefit. Like the military, especially the American military, has been around a long time. It's a machine, and it performs very well for its intended purpose. We can always pick it apart and say what we want to do differently, but when we really look at it, like, it's a beautiful machine, right? Anybody can get thrown out of there. It keeps running, it keeps going, and it's very effective. I think that the challenge, like, if we want to start getting into the higher order thinking and thinking like, hey, what's next, is moving away from maybe this kind of one size fits all tactic for having people mentally tough, and starting to look at, like, what are the individual practices that each person is going to need to take on so that they reach their peak mental toughness. But to do that, they really need to, they need to dig deep into what's going on for them and create the practices themselves. And a lot military is going to come in and tell them, hey, this is the tactic we're going to implement to have you sharp and ready to go and used to discomfort. So an example for a practice I've taken on recently, and I don't get it perfect, I'm screwing it up constantly right now, is I'm doing a lot of work around masculinity, and one of the places the masculine gets a lot of their power is in isolation, is in solitude. What tends to happen, though, is instead of being in solitude, instead of being alone with our fear of death, right, because we all have that, our lifetime of hurt, our loneliness, our boredom, is we dull it. We dull it with sex, with internet pornography, with drugs, with alcohol, with junk food, with sleeping in, with crushing our social media feeds, right? And most of those are not necessarily bad in doses, but when we use it as like a tactic to dull our senses and avoid all that loneliness and kind of misery and fear of death, we don't actually like get to be present with it and own it and work through that stuff. And it's those kind of practices. I don't know if this is going to resonate with your audience, to be honest, but it's those kind of practices that are going to cause the type of transformational growth that I think guys are looking for in a Tough Mudder or a Spartan race. And I really don't think guys are going to get the kind of transformational growth they're looking for through that.
Well, I think it will, because when you talk about performance, there's going to be a moment, and where I've kind of fallen off the CrossFit wagon is I can't deal with the suck anymore. I hate when it gets hard, in certain situations like that, and a lot of times it's because you're not practicing being in that and working through it. And like you said, when you talk about these different things, whether it's pornography or social media or ice cream, it's a distraction, right? You're not going to sit with yourself and deal with yourself, but there's going to be a time in every workout. There's going to be a time in any situation when you have to deal with yourself, and to help the audience align with some of what Wes is talking about, I know me personally, my mental toughness, my performance, everything in my life works better when like I'm motivated and aligned with my intentions, right? Where I kind of get screwed up in life is I forget about what's important. When I forget about the family and the kids, and then all of a sudden I am being distracted by the social media, and then I got to do this because they want me to do that, or for whatever goofy reason. So, no, I think it's a great thing that everybody should recognize, and we've heard it in different ways from a bunch of people. We've had Dawn Fletcher on the podcast, and she's a sports psychologist, and she talks about spend some time with yourself. Teresa Larson's talked in her book and identifying weaknesses. I think there's all kinds of tools, and man, I don't know what it is, but I guess the message might be, and you can tell me what you think, Wes. You gotta find a practice every day that gets you to teach yourself about yourself.
Right. Yeah. Right. And it's like I think every time that you do that, every time you take on a new practice that might be uncomfortable, challenging, etc., whether it's I'm going to visualize when I wake up this morning, or I'm going to do a gratitude journal, or I'm going to meditate, or I'm going to avoid all this like pornography, booze, etc. for like 3 or 4 or 5 months.
Days.
Every time you take something like that on, you kind of create a new track in your brain. Like there's a new way of being that you teach yourself to be able to do, right? Like you're creating this new channel of a way that you can show up. Whereas if you just every day you do the exact same thing, you're like, I'm going to go do CrossFit, which is great. I'm going to do CrossFit, and I'm going to sleep 8 hours and eat good food. There's a ton of value in that. But if we don't continue to challenge ourselves and take on like new work, then we just get stagnant.
And there's a great book that's kind of aligned with what you've been talking about, the War of Art. Stephen Pressfield, he talks about fighting the resistance, and a lot of stuff that you mentioned, these kind of distractions. After I read that book, I started. Number one, I just became much more productive, and it was because I was aware of some of the distractions that were like real simple for people to do. Like if there's something that you don't want to do, it's uncomfortable, you'll find other things. I'll go. I don't like yard work, but I would like go and do shit in the yard, just so I wouldn't have to do something. Like write some elaborate blog post that I've been working on, and now I'm just like drained. And that's the resistance. And if you read this book, it's really short, and Stephen Pressfield has a it's a really kind of conversational way of writing. I think you'll be able to kind of figure those things out quickly, and you'll be able to stop yourself from some of those habits that maybe you do unintentionally.
Yeah, absolutely.
So pivoting away from the mental side of things, looking through your profile, Wes, you've done some. We've had some OPEX coaches on here before. We've had we had a couple of these guys on. Correct me if I'm wrong, Danny, but Ben Benson, right? Our boy, our first interview actually, Andrew Killian, and we're trying, and I hope he's listening. Him and Jen Jones, I think that was the first one. But and a guy we keep trying to get on the podcast, and I'm going to put him on notice, CJ Martin. We're trying to get him on. Yep, he's OPEC guy too. But how's the community responded to some of that? Because there's a lot of testing. You get into your stuff with that, and how is that mixed in with the military training? Do folks respond well to it?
What specifically?
Well, I guess the whole approach. So I guess the better question would be how is that certification, that course, that education, how has it changed your training and how you approach training these athletes?
It's huge. It was like night and day. I came back from my second tour in Afghanistan and signed up for some coaching with James Fitzgerald, actually, and I worked with him for several years before doing the coaching certification. And I was at a point where, I was following, I'm not going to mention them, but I was following one of these, like, combat, tactical fitness, whatever you want to call it, like free training workouts online. It was just a lot of work. It was just somebody creating a bunch of tough, like, let's take sandbags and throw them around and run real hard and do a high amount of volume. And I see it time and time again. It just crushes guys. Like, most people can't handle that where they're at. And I thought, there's got to be a better way to approach this. And luckily, James put together something phenomenal in his coaching education program that really set me up for success. Like, I'm forever grateful for what he created. And I really want to bring that in a big way to the military, police, firefighter community, warrior leaders, let's call them, because it still applies to a lot of guys that are maybe in other industries outside of that combat field. And I think for some guys it doesn't resonate yet. Like, they kind of think, it's bullshit. Like, just all you have to do is, don't eat crappy food and just train hard and you're good to go. Usually those are guys with, like, really good genetics, and it'll take them a long time to understand that some people really do need, like some of these CrossFit Games athletes, they're still training themselves, which is insane. Like, they're the top, they're on the podium, and they're still coaching themselves, right? So we're still at that place where even they haven't realized that with coaching and really dialing things in, you can probably improve a little bit. I think some guys are 100% ready for it. They're exactly where I was. They're tired of overtraining. They're tired of the misinformation and the confusion, and they're really hungry for it. They're really hungry for quality training that can have them do exactly what they need to do to move themselves forward. Not just go and do something random for training, or for exercise, but actually training very systematically over time, and move themselves very, very in a very focused way from point A to point B. So yeah, I think it's great. I think it's great.
Well, the OPEX model is definitely pretty. I would say very well respected by this point, with a lot of the coaches that have come out. Some of that we've just mentioned, but the greater problem that I see and with my time in the military, what I notice in non-specialized groups is a massive amount of people, a very kind of poor ability to individualize for the masses, and lack of equipment. So with all of that said, and I think this is the $1 million question. If you can figure this out, you won't have to work another day in your life, because there's so much money to save the government, in the United States military, on better training, less injuries for some of these guys. How would you assume you could solve a problem like that, where you have so many just kind of limitations, and not be able to individualize so much for people? How would you take a crack at that?
Well, yeah, that's great. One, I'm not even close opposed to trying to take a crack at it. I'll be realistic. We want to dial in, how do we serve an individual?
Yeah.
How do I serve one guy that is either in the military or he's 18 years old and he's like, Wes, I want to be a Navy SEAL. How do I serve him as best as I possibly can? And then I'll try and tackle that problem. Because it's such a, one, you got to get out these old mindsets gone, right? The old dogs are the dinosaurs. You got to change the food. Like, if you go to a mess hall, you see how much Pizza Hut and Burger King there is. Like, how do you, like, why are you asking these guys to hit this PT standard and then you're feeding them junk?
Shit, man. It's dessert after every meal. You literally have all-you-can-eat ice cream at lunch. Like, they turn the machine off for breakfast, but it's back on at lunch.
Yep.
If you were to turn it off, there'd be a riot. These fat fucks would lose their mind.
Yeah, and not to interrupt you, it's weird because you go on every base. We were just on Bragg recently. We're even up here right now at West Point. Every base I've been on, that's what you have. You have the Burger King. It's not even the great stuff. Can't they get a Chipotle and a salad on there on the base somewhere? I mean, what's going on? But
yeah. So and I remember asking for, I get 2 eggs. Hey, can I have 4 or 5? No, but I can get 3 pieces of cake.
That's right.
Then the other thing is how do we?
Oh
one
my
of
God.
the most common cultures in the military is, well, I did it this way, so you should too. Right? Like, I had to suffer on my course, so you should suffer now. It's like, well, how about you had to suffer and you didn't like it, and the whole time you complained that there was a better way to do it, so implement that better way that you wanted for yourself.
That's right. No, it makes sense.
And until that changes, it doesn't matter. You can come up with a perfect logistical piece for the training to implement, and until that cultural piece gets changed, and I don't know what that would look like to do that, it's not going to matter.
Yeah, it would seem tough to me. It would almost be like you'd have to put some incentive to, because in a perfect world, you're not going to be able to take let's say you take the United States Army, you're not going to be able to provide individualized coaching for all that group. But it's almost like if there's maybe an incentive structure to get up into these smaller groups, right? That might be, I guess it's kind of in place, right? Where you get these little groups, maybe they get better stuff. I mean, Eliza just gave a talk somewhere where this group had everything they could ever want, but it was tough to get into it. So I guess
But you can. There's ways around it, right? It's that individualized programming can be done on a continuum. And it's what we do. Our team room training. So it's teamroomtraining.com, and we have about 16 different programs in there. So we have a bodyweight only beginner and advanced. We have an austere environment only beginner and advanced. We have a strength and power beginner and advanced. We have a land-based and a rough-based and a water-based selection prep program. And so we figure out, like, what are the characteristics of these different types of goals some of these individuals might have, and then we just plot out, like, let's create a 2.5 year training plan, and let's plot out where they should be at each 6-month phase, so they can just jump in, do some testing, self-assess themselves, and then jump into a program that's at least somewhat tailored, rather than just one training program for everybody.
Yeah.
So we can get pretty far without actually having everybody have their own perfect, nobody's going to make everybody their own little snowflake in the military. It's just not going to happen, right?
Well, it makes good sense because when I was in San Antonio, I used to volunteer at Trinity University, and it's a Division III school, but they were pretty competitive, and they had smart kids, but they were true student athletes where they had to do their thing. So the way they handled their strength and conditioning is they had a standard. You had to make the standard. If you didn't do your thing, then they would go through some individualized counseling to get you up. But if you kept missing the standard, you weren't part of the team anymore, right? So it was a big conversation after that. So to me, that makes a little bit of sense to do it that way, where check your boxes. Here's what you have to do. Put a little bit on the individual too. That seems to make a little bit of sense.
Right.
Well, no, this is great. I think it's a tough problem to solve, and it's cool to see what you're doing, man. I'm glad there's some smart coaches out there helping people achieve these goals, which are lofty, and the reality is we need more and more of these guys with the circumstances that war is fought in now. They're the most effective variation of a soldier that we have versus kind of these big. There's no tanks driving around, invading Germany anymore. That's not the way it is. So we need more and more of them. And guys, before we wrap this up, Wes, I want to make sure, number one, we let you, kind of shout everybody out about the things you have going on. You kind of talked about a couple things, your book and the programming you have, what did you mentioned something about November. You have something coming out. Can you give us a little explanation about, or a little more detail on what that is?
I think that was the website.
I believe that's what you're talking about.
We're rebranding, got a new website coming. Should be up right at the start of November, but not sure what the domain's going to be. So just go to elitetrainingprograms.com, and once it changes, they'll just get redirected there. A couple other places I'd send guys in the meantime. One, teamroomtraining.com is our members area. We've got a ton of different programs in there. We've got an awesome community. So if you're in one of these spots where you're like, man, I got this huge goal ahead of me, and nobody understands it around me, like I'm kind of by myself here, this is a great community to surround yourself with and support you. SpecOpsTrainingSecrets.com has a free 3-part video series, and it kind of walks guys through our thought process in creating guys that are both really strong as well as basically able to run a marathon. And for some more free content, I'll give them one more link. If they go to sportsvisionforshooting.com, they can get a free first chapter of my book, and then an opportunity to purchase if they want. But some free content there as well for them.
We'll fire it up, gang. Sports Vision for Training, EliteTrainingPrograms.com, TeamTraining.com. Wes Kennedy, killing it, man. We like the content. I really appreciated the mental toughness conversation. I think it's something that we can all just be reminded of to, kind of be one with yourself, learn about yourself, and kind of gut up through it, man. And, dude, I'll tell you what, Danny, I think we did it one more time. I think we proved to folks that if you have a body,
you're an athlete.
Cool. Hey, Wes.